"We can't die here, my boys, not like this," Balthazar cried, his voice hoarse with cold and anguish as the biting wind lashed the ruins of the convent. Little Tiago, feverish in his arms, let out a weak whimper, a sound that tore at the old man's soul. His eldest grandson, Gabriel, clung to his tattered tunic, his eyes wide with fear and hunger. Each step in the snow was torture, each breath a challenge. They had sought refuge in that place, forgotten by gods and men, an abandoned medieval convent where whispers of tormented souls were stronger than the promise of a tomorrow. But what he was about to discover in the bowels of that cursed place would change his family's destiny forever. Balthazar, with a heavy heart, pressed Tiago against his chest, feeling the faint warmth of his feverish grandson's body. The convent, a stone skeleton beneath the grey sky, offered little shelter. He found a nook, less exposed to the wind, where standing walls formed an alcove. He laid Tiago on dirty straw and covered him with his tattered tunic. Gabriel, with chapped lips and eyes fixed on his brother, sat beside him, huddled. "Grandpa, will Tiago be okay?" The boy's voice, an almost inaudible whisper, tore at Balthazar's soul. The old man knelt, embracing Gabriel. "He will, my son. He has to. We won't give up. Understand? Never." Balthazar felt a lump in his throat. The image of the village, the fire, the accusations, the hunger that had driven them out, it all returned like a nightmare. They were outcasts, abandoned. The cold seeped into his bones. Hunger was a constant ache. Tiago coughed, a dry, painful sound. The fever consumed the small body, and Balthazar felt despair gnawing at his insides. He had to do something. Staying there, waiting, was signing their death warrant. With a heavy sigh, Balthazar stood, his knees creaking. "Stay here, my loves. Grandpa will look for firewood. Maybe something for us to eat. Don't wander off." Gabriel nodded, eyes teary, but with a glimmer of trust. Balthazar smiled faintly without reaching his tired eyes and stroked Gabriel's hair before turning away. With each step, the convent whispered ancient stories, legends of nuns and riches. Balthazar had no time for ghosts or treasures. His grandchildren were fading away. He fumbled along the damp walls, exploring dark corridors, empty rooms, collapsed chapels. The air was heavy, laden with mold and desolation. Rubble everywhere. At every door, the same scene, abandonment and ruin. His eyes swept the floor in search of wood for a fire, warmth for Tiago. The faint winter light filtered through cracks, creating dancing shadows. Balthazar felt weariness crushing him, but Tiago's pale face and Gabriel's frightened eyes were his fuel. He could not fail. The promise to his late wife to protect the boys was an unwavering strength. He reached the main nave of the church. Collapsed altars, broken statues, and the roof had caved in, accumulating snow on the stone floor. In the center, where the high altar once stood, was a pile of rubble. Balthazar, breathless, leaned against a cracked pillar, surveying the chaos. Among stones and dirt, he noticed something unusual, a displaced stone slab hidden beneath the debris. A curiosity, fragile as a flame, ignited in his heart. He approached, gasping for breath, and pushed away some smaller stones. The slab, darker, had almost faded carvings. It looked like a door or a lid. A shiver ran down his spine. Could it be that in so much misfortune there was something more than ruins? Hope, long dormant, began to awaken, timid yet persistent in his battered chest. Balthazar felt his already battered heart beat with renewed vigor. The slab, heavy and ancient, seemed to mock him. He knelt, calloused hands trembling, and tried to push it. The stone did not yield. Despair threatened to return. But the image of Tiago, fragile, and Gabriel, so dependent, ignited a silent fury. He could not fail. With a grunt, Balthazar looked for a lever. His eyes swept the rubble and stopped at a twisted iron bar, part of an old grate. With effort, he unearthed it. The metal was cold and heavy. He positioned the bar under the slab and with all his strength leaned his body weight onto it. His muscles protested, but he persisted. Slowly, with a sharp creak, the slab began to move. A smell of damp earth and stagnant air, of forgotten centuries, rose from the opening. Balthazar recoiled, gasping, observing the darkness beneath his feet. It was not a hole, but a narrow staircase descending into a crypt. Fear clutched at his stomach. What if it was a trap? But hope, stubborn, propelled him. His grandchildren, he had to try. With the iron bar in one hand, like an improvised staff, and the other fumbling along the cold wall, Balthazar began the descent. The steps were uneven, covered in dust and cobwebs. The darkness was almost total, just a faint thread of pale light. The air grew heavier. Each step was an act of faith, a plunge into the unknown. The silence of the crypt was profound, broken only by his gasping breath and the pounding of his heart. At the bottom, the space was small and circular. The beam of light barely reached the center. Balthazar fumbled along the walls, feeling the cold, damp stone. His eyes, accustomed to the gloom, began to distinguish shapes. There were niches with unmistakable silhouettes of ancient bones. A shiver ran down his spine, but he refused to give in to panic. He was not there for ghosts, but for life. He continued to explore the chamber, his fingers tracing the rough surface of the walls. In a darker corner, almost hidden by a minor collapse, his fingers found something different. It was not stone nor bone, but wood, smooth wood with barely perceptible carvings. With renewed effort, Balthazar pushed away the stones covering it. His eyes widened. There, half buried, was a carved wooden chest. It was not large, but it looked ancient and heavy. His heart pounded. With trembling hands, he knelt and tried to open it. There was no lock. The lid, though heavy, yielded with a soft creak. The faint light from the opening, reflected, revealed what was inside. The gleam was unmistakable. Gold coins, jewels, a treasure more than he had ever seen glittered in the gloom. Balthazar could not believe it. He fumbled with the coins, feeling the cold, heavy metal. It was real, not a feverish dream, nor a mirage. It was the answer to his prayers, the hope he had almost abandoned. Tears, long dried by pain, welled up in his tired eyes. Tiago, Gabriel, they were saved. Tears streamed down Balthazar's wrinkled face, mixing with dirt and sweat. They were not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming joy, a liberation he hadn't felt in years. The gleam of the gold and jewels in the chest seemed to warm the cold crypt, illuminating not just the space, but also the old man's exhausted soul. Tiago, Gabriel, their lives, which seemed to slip away like sand through his fingers, now had a chance, a real, tangible and shining chance. He reached out a trembling hand and took a handful of coins, feeling the weight and texture of the precious metal. It was like holding hope itself, the future he had given up for lost. The despair that gnawed at him, the guilt for failing to protect his grandchildren, all began to dissipate, replaced by a fierce determination. He needed to get out of there, to go back to the boys. They needed him, and he now had the means to save them from that abyss of misery. Carefully, Balthazar took some of the brightest coins and a small pearl necklace, tucking them into an inner pocket of his tunic, close to his heart. He couldn't take everything, but enough to begin the journey of salvation. The chest, too heavy for one man to move, would remain there for now, a secret guarded by darkness and time. The climb up the staircase seemed more arduous than the descent. Each step was a reminder of his weariness, but the image of his grandchildren's pale faces propelled him with a strength he didn't know he still possessed. He clung to the iron bar, climbing slowly, his heart beating with a mix of exhaustion and euphoria. The cold air of the convent, once oppressive and threatening, now felt invigorating, a breath of life. Balthazar emerged from the crypt, gasping, his eyes sweeping the main nave. Daylight was fading fast, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He needed to hurry. Every minute was precious. With firmer steps, despite the stinging pain in his knees, he walked back to the alcove where he had left the boys. Gabriel was huddled beside Tiago, who coughed weakly, a sound that still pained the old man's soul. The older boy lifted his head at the sound of his grandfather's footsteps, his eyes wide with worry and fear. "Grandpa, you took so long. Tiago is getting worse." Gabriel's voice was a thread of despair, almost breaking. Balthazar quickly knelt, embracing Gabriel tightly, feeling the small body tremble with cold and apprehension. "I know, my love, but Grandpa found something wonderful that will change everything." He released the embrace and opened his fist, revealing the gold coins and the necklace. The golden gleam, even in the growing gloom, immediately captured Gabriel's attention. The boy blinked, incredulous, his eyes fixed on the shimmering metal. What is this, Grandpa?" He extended a curious and hesitant little hand to touch one of the coins. "It's gold, my son. A treasure. I found it in the crypt, beneath the altar. The ancient nuns hid it before they left." Balthazar's voice was choked with emotion, almost a whisper. "With this we can buy food, warm blankets, and most importantly, a healer for Tiago, the best we can find." Gabriel's eyes, once filled with fear and desolation, now filled with a shimmering light, a hope Balthazar thought he would never see again. "A healer? Will Tiago really get better?" Balthazar nodded, tears freely flowing again. "Yes, my love, he will. We're going to get out of here, find help. We won't go hungry or cold anymore. Never again." He took Gabriel's hand and squeezed it, conveying all his conviction. "This treasure. It's our chance to start anew. It's proof that hope never dies, even in the darkest and most forgotten places." He turned to Tiago, his heart heavy, but now with a new and powerful strength. The small body was still warm to the touch, but his breathing seemed a little less noisy, a thread of improvement he clung to with all his might. Perhaps it was his own hope that made him see it, but he needed to believe. "Hold on tight, my little one. Grandpa will save you, I promise." Night was approaching fast, bringing with it an even more intense and biting cold. But for the first time in a long time, Balthazar didn't just feel the penetrating ice. He felt the warmth of the promise, the warmth of the hope that the gold in his pocket represented. They were no longer alone, at the mercy of cruel fate. They had a path, a way out. The convent, once a somber and desolate refuge, now held a secret that would give them a new life. The journey would still be long and dangerous, full of challenges, but the burden in his heart was lighter. Faith in family and overcoming adversity had found its shine, a treasure far greater than gold. The promise echoed in Balthazar's heart, warding off cold and fear. No time to lose. Night advanced. Tiago's fever intensified. "We need to go. Gabriel, now," Balthazar said, his voice firm and urgent. He wrapped Tiago in his tunic and a cloth, holding his grandson tight. The warmth of the gold in his pocket seemed to burn, a reminder of the life to be saved. Gabriel, eyes shining with hope, stood up. "Where are we going, Grandpa?" His voice was small and determined. Balthazar looked at the darkening sky, snow falling heavily. "To wherever there is life, my son, to wherever there is a healer." He knew the journey would be arduous, but inaction was certain death. With Tiago in one arm and the iron bar as a support, Balthazar left the alcove. Gabriel clung to his waist, pushing aside stones. The icy wind hit them. Snow covered everything, transforming the world into a white and treacherous mantle. Each step was a monumental effort, his knees protesting. He felt Tiago's body heavy and inert, a burden of love and despair. The boy's breathing was shallow, a wheezing sound in the night. "Hold on tight, my little one," Balthazar whispered, his voice almost inaudible, his breath forming clouds. He could not fail. The image of his wife smiling floated in the snow mist, an encouragement. Gabriel, despite the tiredness and cold, found new energy. He looked at his grandfather, his face marked by pain and hope. He felt a lump in his throat. He was not just a frightened boy. He needed to be strong for Tiago, for Balthazar. "I'll help, Grandpa. I can do it," he said, squeezing his grandfather's hand. They advanced slowly, a fragile silhouette against the white immensity. Balthazar stumbled, but the iron bar and Gabriel's firm hand prevented him from falling. His eyes swept the darkness, searching for light, a sign of a path. With every meter, doubt tried to creep in, but he pushed it away with the strength of his promise. The gold in his pocket was not just wealth. It was the responsibility of a new life. After what seemed an eternity, exhaustion threatening to overcome him, Balthazar saw it. A flickering light on the horizon, faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. A village. A wave of relief and gratitude washed over him, making him stumble. "Look, Gabriel! Light! We're almost there!" He pointed with his head, his voice choked. Gabriel followed his gaze. A faint but genuine smile lit up his pale face. Hope, once a small glimmer, now ignited into a strong flame. They redoubled their efforts, the light serving as a beacon in the darkness. The ground became firmer, indicating a trail. Balthazar squeezed Tiago once more, feeling the warmth of his grandson's body. Now a little less feverish, or perhaps his perception altered by faith. He needed to believe that the improvement was already beginning. As they approached, silhouettes of wooden houses and a small church became visible. The smell of fireplace smoke and the aroma of fresh bread floated in the air, an invitation to life. Balthazar felt his legs give way, but his unwavering determination lifted him. He needed to find the healer fast. The coins in his pocket were the key, the bridge between misery and salvation. He would not hesitate to use them for the lives of his grandchildren. The entrance to the village was a mix of relief and apprehension. The narrow streets, lit by flickering lanterns, seemed a labyrinth of shadows and promises. The smell of wood smoke and stew warmed the air, a stark contrast to the icy cold of the convent. Balthazar, with Tiago still nestled in his arms, felt the curious glances of the few villagers who were still outside their homes. They were suspicious glances, but also tinged with a hint of compassion at the sight of the old man's fragile figure and the children. "Please, help me," Balthazar pleaded, his voice hoarse, addressing a burly man emerging from a tavern, his face flushed with wine. "My grandson is dying. I need a healer, as quickly as possible." The man stopped, examining them cautiously. "Healer? Old Ilara lives by the river, but she doesn't see just anyone, and she's expensive." His tone was skeptical. Balthazar, without hesitation, reached into his pocket and pulled out one of the gold coins. The gleam of the golden metal in the gloom made the man's eyes widen. "I'll pay. I'll pay whatever it takes. Please, take me to her." The villager's expression changed immediately. Skepticism gave way to a mix of surprise and greed. "Gold? Well, that's a different story then. Come, I'll take you, but it's far, and the snow is heavy." He made a hurried gesture, his voice softer. Gabriel, who watched everything with wide eyes, squeezed his grandfather's hand. For the first time, he saw the power of that treasure. It wasn't just a pretty gleam, it was a key to help, to life. The walk to Ilara's house was slow and exhausting. The snow, falling relentlessly, made every step a battle. Balthazar felt Tiago's body growing hotter and heavier, his breathing weaker. Despair threatened to return, but the image of the gold in his pocket and the promise to himself kept him firm. He could not lose Tiago. Finally, they arrived at a small, isolated cabin from which emanated a strong smell of herbs and smoke. The villager knocked on the wooden door, and an elderly woman with a wrinkled face and piercing eyes opened it. Ilara. "What do you want at this hour?" she asked, her voice harsh. "My grandson, madam. He has a high fever. I need you to cure him," Balthazar said, extending the gold coin. "I will pay well." Ilara took the coin, her eyes fixed on its gleam. A faint smile, almost imperceptible, appeared on her lips. "Come in. But I don't promise miracles. Fever is a treacherous fire." She gestured, inviting them into the warmth of the cabin, where the aroma of herbs seemed to embrace hope. Balthazar entered, feeling the warmth of the crackling fire in the hearth envelop his exhausted body. The smell of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling and the steam of some infusion boiling over the fire filled the air, creating an atmosphere that was both strange and comforting. Gabriel, clinging to his grandfather's leg, watched Ilara with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The old healer, without a word, indicated a simple bed made of straw and wool blankets near the fire. Carefully, Balthazar laid Tiago there. His grandson's small body seemed even more fragile under the flickering light of the cabin. Ilara approached, her piercing eyes examining Tiago with an intensity that made Balthazar's heart clench. She touched the boy's forehead, then his neck, and finally placed her ear over his small chest, listening to his wheezing breath. Her face, once hardened, softened slightly, a wrinkle of worry appearing between her eyebrows. Balthazar watched every movement, every expression, holding his breath. Gabriel beside him gripped his hand tightly, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. "The fever is high, very high," Ilara murmured, her voice grave, as she moved away from Tiago to get a clay bowl and a handful of herbs from a pot. "The fire is already consuming his strength. He is weak." Balthazar felt a chill run down his spine, more intense than the snow. But you can cure him, can't you? I have more gold, much more." He reached into his pocket, ready to show the rest of the coins. Ilara raised a hand, stopping him, her eyes, which had seen so many lives and deaths, fixed on Balthazar's. "Gold helps buy the rarest herbs, yes. I have some here that can combat this treacherous fire. But what your grandson needs, Balthazar, is more than herbs and coins." She paused dramatically, and the silence in the cabin became heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire. "What does he need, then?" Balthazar asked, his voice almost a whisper, despair again gnawing at his insides. Ilara looked at the pearl necklace Balthazar had tucked into his pocket, a hint of its gleam still visible. "This gold. And these jewels," she said, pointing to Balthazar's pocket. "They come from a place I know well, from the abandoned convent, aren't they?" Balthazar's eyes widened in surprise. How could she know? "Yes," he replied, his voice choked. "I was one of the novices of that convent many, many years ago," Ilara revealed, and Balthazar's surprise was immense. "Before hunger and disease forced us to leave, and the treasure was hidden for times of great need. I know the story of every coin, every jewel. They are not just wealth, Balthazar. They are the hope of a community, the promise of a future." She approached, and her eyes, once severe, now carried a deep melancholy. "I can cure your grandson. I have the wisdom and the herbs. But for the cure to be complete, for Tiago's life not just to be saved, but to flourish, you must understand the true purpose of this treasure." Balthazar felt a lump in his throat. The turning point. It wasn't just about paying. It was about a legacy, a responsibility. Ilara was not just a healer, but a guardian of a story that now intertwined with his own. "What is the purpose, Ilara?" he asked, his voice hoarse, feeling the weight of the coins in his pocket in a completely new way. "The purpose is life, Balthazar. Life in community. Those nuns hid the treasure not for one person to get rich, but so that one day it could rebuild what was lost. so that hope would flourish again where desolation reigned, so that social justice would be restored and altruism would be the foundation of a new existence. Ilara took Balthazar's hand, squeezing it. "I will help you, but you must promise me that you will use this treasure not just for your grandchildren, but for the greater good, to help this village so that no one else has to suffer as you have suffered." Balthazar looked at Tiago, then at Gabriel, who listened to everything, his eyes fixed on Ilara. The promise to his wife to protect the boys now expanded. It wasn't just about them, but about the chance to create a better world for them. That treasure, which he saw as personal salvation, now revealed itself as an opportunity for redemption for many, an immense responsibility, but also a powerful inspiration. He nodded, tears streaming again, but now they were tears of a new kind of hope, a collective hope. "I promise, Ilara. I promise." Ilara smiled, a genuine smile that illuminated her wrinkled face. "Then, let's begin. But the journey will be long, and faith, Balthazar, will be your greatest cure." She turned to the fireplace, beginning to prepare the infusion, while Balthazar, with his heart lighter and his soul heavier with purpose, watched little Tiago, feeling that the true journey was just beginning. Ilara, with movements that denoted years of practice and a deep knowledge of the forces of nature, began to work. She added the dried herbs to the boiling water in a small copper pot, stirring with a worn wooden spoon. The steam that rose carried a strong, earthy aroma, a mix of wild mint, thyme, and something more bitter, but which somehow brought a sense of healing. Balthazar watched every gesture, every wrinkle on the old healer's face that deepened with concentration. His eyes, once fixed on the gleam of gold, were now fixed on the scene, on the promise of life. Gabriel, huddled beside his grandfather, felt the warmth of the fire and the smell of the herbs, and for the first time in a long time, a thread of tranquility settled in his small chest. He looked at Tiago, who, despite still being feverish, seemed a little calmer, as if the very atmosphere of Ilara's cabin was already beginning to exert its effect. "This infusion," Ilara explained without taking her eyes off the pot, "will combat the fire consuming him and calm his spirit. But true healing takes time and demands more than just remedies." She turned to Balthazar, her piercing eyes again fixed on him. "It demands faith, patience, and the strength of a heart that refuses to give up." Balthazar nodded, Ilara's words echoing in his soul. The promise he had made was not a burden, but a calling. The treasure, once a means of personal salvation, now became an instrument of redemption, a link between the past and a future he could barely conceive. The responsibility was immense, but the vision of Tiago, so fragile, and Gabriel, so hopeful, filled him with renewed courage. When the infusion was ready, Ilara filtered it with a fine cloth and poured it into a clay mug. Carefully, she knelt beside Tiago and, with infinite patience, began to give the boy small sips. Every drop seemed a silent prayer. Tiago swallowed with difficulty, but swallowed. Balthazar held his breath, watching his grandson's chest rise and fall, a movement that seemed smoother with each sip. Ilara's hands were firm, her touch gentle. She wiped the sweat from Tiago's forehead with a damp cloth, and Balthazar noticed a slight relaxation in the muscles of the small face. "He will rest now," Ilara said, moving back a little. "The medicine will do its work, but the night is long and the fever can be stubborn. We need to keep watch." She looked at Balthazar, a silent invitation to collaboration. Gabriel, seeing his grandfather so focused on Tiago, felt an urge to help. He approached the bed, extending his small hand to touch his brother's arm. "He'll be okay, Grandpa, won't he?" he whispered, his voice laden with an innocence that cut to the heart. Balthazar took Gabriel's hand, squeezing it tightly. Yes, my love, he will. Ilara is helping us, and we will help him too. He felt the warmth of Gabriel's hand, a reminder of the strength of family, of the connection that bound them. Ilara's cabin, once a strange place, now seemed a sanctuary of hope. The fire crackled, shadows danced on the walls, and the smell of herbs mingled with the aroma of bread that Ilara offered them. A gesture of welcome that Balthazar accepted with gratitude. As they ate, Ilara told them more about the convent, about the nuns who inhabited it, and the vision they had of a more just world, where charity and altruism were the cornerstones. They wanted the treasure to be used to rebuild the community, to care for the most needy, so that hunger and disease would no longer plague the innocent. Her words were an echo of the promise Balthazar had made, reinforcing the greater purpose. He felt the weight of the gold in his pocket, but now it was a weight of responsibility and a new destiny. The vigil began, not just for Tiago's life, but for the promise of a better future for all. The night in Ilara's cabin stretched on, dense and silent, broken only by the constant crackle of the fire and Tiago's wheezing breath. Balthazar sat beside the improvised bed, his eyes fixed on his grandson's pale face. Ilara's infusion seemed to have brought a brief relief, but the fever, like a cunning enemy, returned in waves, making Tiago's small body tremble and sweat. Ilara, sitting on a low stool, watched them with a serenity that only experience can grant. From time to time, she would get up to check on Tiago, touching his forehead with her wrinkled palm, her lips murmuring ancient prayers. Gabriel, exhausted, had fallen asleep, leaning on his grandfather's shoulder, his small hand still clutching Balthazar's tunic. The old man stroked his eldest grandson's hair, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also a new and powerful determination. The promise made to Ilara did not oppress him. On the contrary, it seemed to have ignited a flame in his spirit. It was not just about saving Tiago, but about honoring a legacy, about sowing hope where before there had only been despair. He thought of the nuns, of their dedicated lives, of the treasure hidden with such a noble purpose. Those coins and jewels, once seen as a personal miracle, now represented a commitment to the future of many. At dawn, when the first pale rays of sun began to peek through the cracks of the cabin, Tiago's fever finally broke. Cold sweat covered his body, but his breathing was more regular, his face less flushed. Ilara, who had spent the night in vigil, touched the boy's forehead and nodded with a small smile. "The worst is over, Balthazar," she said, her voice hoarse with tiredness but full of relief. "He will recover, but he will need a lot of care and nourishment to strengthen his body." Balthazar felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude and emotion. Tears, which he had held back for so many nights, streamed freely down his wrinkled face. He took Tiago's small hand, which now seemed to have a little more life, and kissed it tenderly. Gabriel woke with the movement, and seeing his grandfather crying, sat up, startled. "What happened, Grandpa?" he asked, his eyes still heavy with sleep. Balthazar looked at him, a trembling smile on his lips. "Tiago will be fine, my son. He will be fine." Gabriel looked at his brother, and a radiant smile, the first in a long time, lit up his face. He leaned over and gave Tiago a soft kiss on the forehead. That moment of pure and simple joy was the most valuable treasure Balthazar could have found. Ilara approached, bringing a bowl of warm broth. "Now it's time to take care of both of you, and to think about tomorrow." She looked at Balthazar, her eyes conveying the depth of the promise he had made. "This village needs help. There are many families suffering from hunger and cold. The treasure can be the seed of a new life for everyone." Balthazar nodded, feeling the warmth of the broth in his hands, and the strength of Ilara's words in his heart. The journey had not ended with Tiago's healing. It had only just begun. The responsibility to use the treasure for the greater good, to rebuild the community and restore hope, was a challenge he accepted with a renewed spirit. He looked at his grandchildren, sleeping peacefully now, and knew he would do everything to honor the promise, transforming the misery of the past into a future of abundance and justice for all. Ilara's cabin, once a refuge of despair, now became the cradle of new hope, a place where human connection and altruism began to rewrite destiny. Ilara's cabin, once a refuge of despair, now became the cradle of new hope, a place where human connection and altruism began to rewrite destiny. Balthazar felt the weight of the promise on his shoulders, but it was not a burden. It was a purpose that warmed his soul more than the fire in the hearth. He watched Tiago, who now slept a peaceful, fever-free sleep. His face serene and a genuine smile, long forgotten, bloomed on his wrinkled lips. Gabriel, beside him, also slept deeply, exhausted by the vigil and apprehension, but with a more relaxed countenance. Ilara, with a cup of herbal tea in her hands, sat opposite Balthazar, her wise eyes fixed on him. "Morning brings new strength, Balthazar, and with it, the opportunity to begin fulfilling your promise." Her voice was soft, but laden with a silent expectation. Balthazar nodded, feeling the urgency to act. "Yes, Ilara, but where do we start? The village. It seems so desolate." He gestured vaguely towards the window, where snow still covered the outside world, but now seemed less threatening. "We start with what is most urgent," Ilara replied, setting down her cup. "Hunger is the deepest wound. There are children who haven't eaten in days, families without firewood to warm their homes, and winter is still far from over." She stood up, walking to a shelf full of herb pots. "Gold can buy bread, meat, blankets. It can bring some warmth and immediate relief. But the real challenge is to restore faith, dignity." Balthazar felt a pit in his stomach. The task seemed monumental, but the image of a recovered Tiago and the promise he had made propelled him. "I will go to the market in the neighboring town. I will buy what is needed, and I will distribute it. We'll start there." His voice, once hesitant, now carried a firmness that surprised even himself. Ilara smiled, a gleam of approval in her eyes. "That's the attitude, Balthazar. But don't do it alone. The community needs to unite. It needs to see that hope doesn't just come from outside, but from within themselves." By midday, with Tiago still sleeping and Gabriel awake but weak, Balthazar prepared to leave. Ilara had prepared a bag with bread and cheese for the journey. "Take Gabriel with you," she suggested. "He needs to see, needs to understand what is to come, and you will need help carrying the provisions." Balthazar hesitated for a moment, looking at his grandson, who still seemed fragile. But Gabriel, hearing the conversation, lifted his head, his eyes full of determination. "I can go. Grandpa, I want to help." Balthazar's heart swelled with pride. He took Gabriel's hand, feeling the small but firm pressure. "Then let's go, my son. The journey is long, but the purpose is greater." As they left the cabin, the snow beneath their feet felt less cold, and the air, once biting, now carried a premonition of change. The gold in his pocket was no longer a heavy secret, but a tool, a symbol of a new era. They walked towards the village and then to the town with a simple yet ambitious plan: to transform misery into hope. One loaf of bread, one blanket, one smile at a time. True redemption began now, not in the abandoned convent, but in the heart of an old man who dared to dream of a better future for all. Balthazar and Gabriel advanced through the snow, each step a calculated effort against the cold that bit at their skin and the wind that howled like a hungry wolf. The sun, still low on the horizon, cast long bluish shadows over the frozen landscape. Gabriel, despite his weakness, walked with surprising determination beside his grandfather, his eyes fixed on the path ahead, as if he could see hope materialized in every snowflake. Balthazar, in turn, felt the weight of the gold in his pocket, no longer as a burden of secrecy, but as the tangible promise of a future. He squeezed Gabriel's hand, a silent gesture of encouragement for both. The journey to the neighboring town would be long, and the road, covered by a thick layer of ice and snow, made every movement perilous. They reached the village exhausted but did not stop. The sight of the silent houses, the smokeless chimneys, and the thin faces peering from windows reinforced the urgency of his mission. No one approached them. Distrust and despair had built invisible walls between people. Balthazar felt a pang of sadness, but also a renewed strength. It was precisely for these people that he was doing this. They needed more than bread. They needed a sign that they were not alone. The town, a few hours' walk from the village, was a vibrant contrast. Although winter also scourged it, the market teemed with the little life the cold allowed. Carts creaked, merchants shouted their offers, and the smell of fresh bread and spices floated in the air, a symphony of aromas that made Gabriel's stomach rumble. Balthazar's heart clenched at the sight of abundance, knowing that so close, his own village was languishing. He pulled Gabriel close, his hand firm on his shoulder. "Come, my son. We need to be smart." With the gold in hand, Balthazar felt like a different man. He who once begged for a piece of bread could now buy an entire barn. He approached a sturdy merchant who sold sacks of grain. The man, with a thick beard and suspicious eyes, looked at the gold coins with a mixture of greed and surprise. Balthazar, with a voice that brooked no questions, asked for large quantities of flour, beans, salted meat, and heavy blankets. The merchant, seeing the old man's seriousness and the gleam of the gold, hastened to comply. Gabriel watched, marveling, as his grandfather negotiated with a confidence he had never seen. With each purchase, Balthazar felt the responsibility grow. It wasn't just about the products, but about the impact they would have. He asked the merchant to arrange a cart and a horse to transport the supplies back to the village. The merchant, realizing the potential for profit and the unusual generosity, agreed, though with a look of curiosity about the destination of such a load. Balthazar gave no details, only insisted on the urgency. While waiting for the cart to be prepared, Balthazar and Gabriel ate warm bread fresh from the oven, the first truly substantial food in days. Gabriel devoured the bread, his eyes shining. "Grandpa, is it for everyone in the village?" he asked, his mouth full. Balthazar nodded, a soft smile on his lips. "Yes, my son, for everyone who needs it, and you will help me distribute it, so that everyone knows that hope has arrived." The return journey was easier, with the cart laden with provisions. The snow continued to fall, but the weight of the load was compensated by the lightness in Balthazar's heart. He imagined the faces of the hungry children, the relief of the parents. The promise to Ilara and the nuns of the convent echoed in his mind, propelling him. The sun was already setting when they spotted the first houses of the village. Smoke began to rise from some chimneys, a sign that life, however fragile, persisted. But the true transformation was about to begin. Balthazar knew that the distribution would be the first step, but the hardest would be to convince people to believe again, to rebuild the community that hunger had dismantled. He breathed deeply, feeling the cold air, but also the flame of hope that now burned brightly in his chest. The cart, heavy with material goods, carried something far more valuable, the seed of a future. Balthazar looked at Gabriel, who slept, exhausted, nestled among the sacks of flour. He smiled. The journey was just beginning. The cart, heavy with material goods, carried something far more valuable, the seed of a future. Balthazar looked at Gabriel, who slept, exhausted, nestled among the sacks of flour. He smiled. The journey was just beginning. The creak of the wheels on the frozen snow announced the cart's arrival in the village. The sun had already set, and the darkness of the night embraced the silent houses, dotted with rare, flickering lights. The smoke rising from some chimneys was a faint thread of hope, but the overall atmosphere was still one of desolation. Balthazar stopped the cart in the center of the square, where the merciless wind swept the last snowflakes. The silence was almost palpable, broken only by the tired whinny of the horse. Gabriel woke with the movement, rubbing his eyes and looking around with curiosity and a little apprehension. "Are we there, Grandpa?" he whispered, his voice still hoarse with sleep. "Yes, my son, we are," Balthazar replied, feeling the cold penetrate his bones, but also a renewed energy. Some faces began to appear in the windows, curious shadows peering at the laden cart. Distrust was evident in every furtive glance. No one approached. Fear and hunger had taught people to be cautious, to expect the worst. Balthazar breathed deeply, feeling the weight of that invisible barrier. He knew that words would not be enough. Action was needed. "Come, Gabriel. Help me unload," Balthazar said, his voice firm, but with a tone of invitation. He began to untie the ropes that held the sacks of flour and blankets. Gabriel, hesitant at first, soon joined in, his small strength added to his grandfather's. The sound of sacks being dragged and piled in the snow echoed in the square. Slowly, an elderly woman with a worn shawl covering her head emerged from her house, her eyes fixed on the cart. Then, a thin man with calloused hands also ventured outside. One by one, people began to emerge from their homes, drawn by curiosity and a faint spark of hope. Their faces were marked by hunger and cold, their eyes empty of emotion. Balthazar stood up, his body aching but his spirit unwavering. He looked at the villagers one by one and saw the pain he himself had felt. "Friends," he began, his voice echoing in the stillness of the night, "I know that hunger and despair have separated us. I know that many of you have lost hope." He paused, letting his words be absorbed. "But I tell you that hope is not lost. I found a treasure not for myself, but for all of us." He pointed to the cart, to the sacks of flour, the beans, the salted meat, and the blankets. "This is for you, so that no one else has to feel the pain of hunger, so that your homes are warm, so that your children do not shiver from cold." As he spoke, he took a sack of flour and placed it in the arms of the elderly woman who had approached. She held it as if it were the most precious object in the world, tears welling up in her wrinkled eyes. A murmur began to spread through the crowd. A man coughed. Another wiped his nose. Gabriel, beside his grandfather, watched the scene, feeling a warmth in his chest. This was not the grandfather who dragged himself through the snow, but a leader, a beacon. "But this is just the beginning," Balthazar continued, his voice gaining strength. "The treasure can buy bread, but it cannot rebuild our community. Only we can do that. We need to unite, as the nuns of the convent dreamed, to help each other, to share what we have, so that justice and altruism may flourish where misery reigned." He extended his hand to the thin man who was closest. "Come, help us distribute. There is enough for everyone, and tomorrow we will talk about how we can rebuild together." The man hesitated for an instant, but the sincerity in Balthazar's eyes and the sight of the food propelled him. He took a sack of beans and, with a nod, began to help. Gradually, other villagers began to move, some still skeptical, but most with a new light in their eyes. Children, who had previously hidden, now peeked out, their little eyes shining at the sight of the soft blankets and bread. The square, once silent and somber, began to come alive with murmurs, footsteps, and finally, some timid smiles. Balthazar felt a wave of emotion. The promise to Ilara, to the nuns, to his grandchildren, was beginning to be fulfilled. The seed of hope had been planted, and the climax of his journey was not the treasure itself, but the rebirth of human connection, the warmth that ignited in the hearts of those people. The seed of hope had been planted, and the climax of his journey was not the treasure itself, but the rebirth of human connection, the warmth that ignited in the hearts of those people. That night, the village square, once a stage of desolation, was transformed. The villagers, once hesitant, now moved with a new energy. Trembling hands reached out to receive the sacks of flour, the beans, and the soft blankets. Silent tears streamed down wrinkled faces of gratitude, and murmurs of thank you echoed in the cold air. Balthazar, with the help of Gabriel and the few who joined him, distributed the provisions until the cart was almost empty. He saw mothers embracing their children with new blankets, fathers carrying sacks of food with renewed strength. The cold of the night seemed to diminish before the warmth emanating from that act of generosity. Gabriel, with wide eyes, watched every face, every smile that bloomed, feeling his chest warm. He didn't fully understand the depth of that moment, but he knew it was good, that it was right. At dawn, the village awoke differently. The smell of baking bread floated in the air, and thick smoke rose from almost every chimney. Children, once hidden in their homes, now played in the snow, their laughter echoing through the square. Faces that were once grey and marked by hunger now displayed a pale flush of life. Balthazar, who had spent the night in Ilara's cabin, making sure Tiago continued to recover, returned to the village. He stopped at the entrance, observing the scene with a light heart. The sight was a balm for his tired soul. The oppressive silence had been replaced by a hum of activity, an unmistakable sign that life was indeed returning. Ilara, who accompanied him, smiled, her wise eyes shining. "See, Balthazar, the seed has blossomed, but now it needs cultivation." They approached the square, where the villagers were already gathering in small groups, no longer in silence, but talking, sharing stories, and for the first time in a long time, hope. One of the men who had helped the night before, a carpenter named Jonas, approached Balthazar, his eyes full of respect. "Balthazar, what do we do now? We have food, but our houses are still in ruins, our fields frozen." Balthazar looked at Ilara, who nodded. "Jonas is right. Food is the first step. The next is to rebuild, but not alone, together." He turned to the forming crowd. "Friends, the treasure I found is a gift, but the true wealth lies in our hands and in our hearts." The nuns of the convent dreamed of a united community where everyone helped each other. "That is what we will do." He proposed that they organize themselves, the strongest to clear snow and repair houses, the women to cook and care for the sick, the elders to teach lost trades. The idea, once unthinkable, was met with a mix of surprise and enthusiasm. Distrust, which had taken deep root, began to give way to a sense of shared purpose. In the days that followed, the village transformed into a construction site and a place of life. The sound of hammers and saws echoed, mixing with laughter and forgotten songs. Balthazar, with Gabriel always by his side, worked tirelessly, not as a distant leader, but as one among them. He felt the pain in his muscles, but the joy in his heart was greater. To see the community reborn, to see justice and altruism flourish, was the true redemption. Tiago, now stronger, watched everything from Ilara's cabin, his curious eyes following the movement. The convent, once a place of shadows and legends, had become the cradle of a new era for the village. Balthazar, at the end of each day, looked at the starry sky, feeling the presence of his wife and the nuns, a smile of peace on his lips. The conflict of misery and despair had been resolved, replaced by the certainty of a future built on unity and hope. A year had passed since that transformative night. The snow melted, and spring brought lush green to the fields, and hope blossomed in every corner of the village. The houses, once in ruins, were repaired and reinforced. Their chimneys constantly expelled smoke, a comforting sign of warm homes and full pots. The melodious singing of birds and the joyful laughter of children in the square, a vibrant contrast to the somber silence of the past. Balthazar, with whiter hair and slower steps, carried in his eyes a renewed sparkle, a reflection of the peace he had finally found in his heart. He sat on a wooden bench in the square, watching life pulsate. Gabriel, taller and stronger, worked diligently with Jonas, the carpenter, learning the trade with a dedication that filled his grandfather with pride. His hands, once fragile, held tools with dexterity, helping to erect a new barn. Tiago, the little miracle, ran after butterflies, his contagious laughter echoing, a constant reminder of life rescued. Ilara, the healer, remained a pillar of unwavering wisdom and compassion. Her cabin, expanded and well supplied, served as a center for healing and learning, teaching women about herbs and essential care. The convent's treasure, managed with prudence and justice by a council of villagers, including Balthazar and Ilara, had been the seed of transformation. It brought food, materials, seeds for the fields, tools for artisans, and a mill, ensuring fresh bread for everyone. Distrust and despair were swept away, replaced by a strong sense of community. The villagers worked together in the fertile fields, shared harvests, and helped each other. Justice, once empty, was practiced daily, with everyone having a voice and active participation. Altruism, a daily practice, was visible in every gesture of help and sincere smile. Human connection broken by misery had been restored and strengthened, weaving a network of support and affection. The convent, still abandoned, was no longer a place of somber legends, but a silent and powerful symbol of redemption. Sometimes, Balthazar and his grandchildren visited its ruins with deep reverence. He told Gabriel and Tiago the story of the nuns, of the promise, and of the treasure that had given them the chance to start anew, to build something much greater. "The true treasure, my children," he would say, his eyes fixed on the ancient stones, "was not in the chest but in the hearts of the people who dared to believe in hope and the strength of unity, transforming pain into purpose." The village, reborn from tragedy, became a beacon of hope for neighboring communities, living proof that the light of humanity can shine brighter and more intensely. Balthazar, at the end of his journey, was not just an old widower, but the patriarch of a prosperous community, faithful guardian of a promise fulfilled. He looked at his grandchildren, at the vibrant and lively village, and felt that his life, marked by loss and pain, had found its sweetest purpose. The story of Balthazar and the village was a hymn to the resilience of the human spirit, to the beauty of connection, and to the transformative power of love and faith. 3 years had passed since the rebirth, and Balthazar's village, affectionately called Hope Village, flourished with a vitality that defied the memories of its dark past. Winter, though harsh, no longer brought the dread of hunger, but the promise of rest before the next harvest. The houses, once skeletal, radiated warmth and light, and the smell of stews and fresh bread hung in the air, a welcoming invitation to any traveler who dared to brave the snow. Balthazar, now in his 80s, sat by the fireplace in his renovated cabin, his hair white as snow and his hands, once calloused, now held a storybook that Gabriel read to him. His eyes held the gleam of wisdom and a deep peace. He watched Tiago, a robust 7-year-old boy sleeping soundly in his bed, his face rosy and serene. With each calm breath, Balthazar felt the confirmation that his journey had been worthwhile. Gabriel, now a 17-year-old young man, was a skilled carpenter working with Jonas. His hands, once fragile, wielded tools with dexterity, a pillar of the community, ready to help. That day, he had repaired a neighbor's fence, refusing payment, just a smile and a bowl of soup. "It's what Grandpa taught us in," he had said, his eyes shining. "That true wealth lies in serving." Ilara, the healer, continued to be the wise soul of the village. Her cabin, a center for health and learning, received people from distant villages, healing bodies and spirits. Balthazar visited her frequently, sharing tea and memories. "I still remember that day, Balthazar," she would murmur, a gentle smile. "You arrived with your grandchildren almost lifeless, and now look, a village reborn." Balthazar merely nodded, a lump of gratitude in his throat. The central square, once silent, was the pulsating heart of life. A new well had been built, and around it, women exchanged stories and laughter. Children played in the snow, their laughter filling the air. Men helped each other in the fields, preparing the land for the thaw, their faces marked by labor, but also by satisfaction. The convent's treasure, though essential, had become secondary. The true currency was trust and mutual love. The Council of Villagers, with Balthazar and Ilara, ensured justice and altruism. No one was left behind. If a family faced difficulties, the community united. The convent, the ruins that were the turning point, remained untouched. A silent sanctuary, a reminder of the darkness that preceded the light. Balthazar and his grandchildren still visited it, the last time he took them to the crypt. "Here," he had said, "was where hope was hidden, but it flourished because we watered it with courage and unity." Tiago had asked, "Grandpa, are the nuns happy?" Balthazar had smiled. "I'm sure they are, my little one. I'm sure they are." The story of Hope Village was not just about a treasure found, but about an unbreakable human spirit. It was living proof that even in despair, faith, family, and human connection could build a future of beauty and purpose, a legacy that Balthazar knew his grandchildren and future generations would carry like an eternal hymn to life.